Hello, everyone, and welcome to the People Strategy Forum. Trust is the foundation of leadership, but it's also the first thing to crack under pressure. And our guest today has devoted his life's work to helping leaders strengthen trust when it matters most. Dr. Darryl Stickel, the founder of Trust Unlimited and the author of Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World, is one of the top world's experts on this subject. So we're very thankful for having him here today. He has a PhD from Duke and years advising governments, corporations, and communities. Darryl knows how silence, fear, and pressure can derail performance and how leaders can break through those barriers with the right techniques. And he's going to tell us about some of that today. So he's here to share how trust can become one of your greatest competitive advantages, especially in uncertain times. So if you're a leader who wants to inspire loyalty, unlock performance, and guide your people through complexity, this is the conversation for you. So let's welcome Dr. Darryl Stickel. Welcome, Doctor. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Please just call me Darryl. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and with your audience.
Yes, for sure. I feel very fortunate to have you here, Darryl. So, Darryl, I'd like to start out these conversations with giving an opportunity for people to understand a little bit more about you and your
Right.
story. So, if you can kind of dive into tell us a little bit about what inspired you to make trust the work of your life.
That's a good question. And I think it was Kierkegaard that said life only makes sense in reverse. So I was born and raised in a small town in northern British Columbia, Canada. Port St. John. It was about 13,000 people when I grew up there. And it was an hour's drive from the next really small community. We had harsh winters and environments were challenging at times. So you got this sense that you had to pull together. And that's stuck with me for my whole life. I have this feeling that if you can help people, you should. And so, growing up there, I played hockey because just what everybody played hockey. Um, and when I was 17, I was attacked by a fan with a club, shattered my helmet, knocked me unconscious. Apparently, I stopped breathing 3 times on the way to the hospital and ended up with a really bad case of post-concussion syndrome. And I have a hereditary retinal disorder. I knew I was losing my sight, that I would become legally blind. And so my plan had been to think for a living, right? To train my
Hmm.
brain to a place where I was able to earn a living and be independent because I could solve problems. Now all of a sudden I couldn't think.
Hmm.
And I had the attention span of a fruit fly. And so I had this long stretch of feeling helpless and hopeless, and it took a couple of years for me to recover. I went to college and I failed everything, and it was a challenging time, and it taught me a level of empathy that was unusual. So I went to university, and the strangest things started happening where, I'd be sitting on a bus and strangers would come and sit down next to me and say, "I'm really having a hard time."
Hmm.
And so there was something about me that was making people open up and connect with me in a way that others weren't. And so I got curious about that. I did an undergraduate degree in psychology and worked with troubled teens and families in crisis and on crisis lines and those kinds of things to hone those skills and to better understand what was going on. And then I transitioned, did a master's degree in public administration, was working in native land claims, and they would ask me these sort of deep philosophical questions like, what is self-government? Or what will the province look like 50 years after claims are settled? The last question they asked me, Sam, was how do we convince a group of people we've shafted for over 100 years they should trust us?
Yeah.
And I thought, man, that's a good question. And so I went to Duke and wrote my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments and ended up with two of the world's leading experts, leading academics on trust on my thesis committee. And when I finished, they sat me down and they said, we had a conversation when you first came to us with this topic, and we agreed that it was too big, it was too complicated, you'd never solve it. And we gave you 6 months. We said, we'll give him 6 months, he'll come crawling back, then we'll let him chisel off a little piece of this, and that'll be his thesis. They said, 6 months in, you were so far beyond us, we couldn't help anymore. All we could do was sit and watch. And Here we are a few years later. We think you've solved it. And so I ended up going to McKinsey and Company as a consultant, and they said, "Man, you've got good client hands. Let's send you to the worst places possible." And so I got a chance to apply the model. And then I was involved in a car accident and had another concussion.
Oh, wow.
And so I just couldn't work 80 hours a week anymore.
Hmm.
And so I started a little company called Trust Unlimited, and I've spent the last 20 years helping people better understand what trust is, how it works, and most importantly, how to build it.
Well, it's really interesting what you said as far as the building trust in a hostile environment. And there's a lot of conflict that's going on, around the world, and there's people that are fearful of technology change that's coming their way.
Hmm.
Uh, Having those sensitive and but important conversation with their leaders and leadership, worried about their jobs. And so when we're thinking about all the stress that is upon people, workers today,
Right.
what is the first thing that they should be doing? I mean, should they be looking at their mindset? Should be taking action? What's your thoughts there?
So for me, we first need to understand what trust is if we're going to effectively build it. And I believe that trust is the willingness to make yourself vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. When people are deciding whether to trust us or not, they're asking themselves two fundamental questions. And the first question is, how likely am I to be harmed? Which is perceived uncertainty. And the second question is, if I'm harmed, how bad's it going to hurt? Which is perceived vulnerability. And so for me, trust is a combination of these two bases of trust, uncertainty and vulnerability. And I believe it's actually uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. We each have a threshold of risk that we can tolerate. And if we're beneath that threshold, we trust. If we're beyond it, we don't. And so building trust becomes a simple matter of understanding where does uncertainty come from and how do I take steps to reduce it? Where do perceptions of vulnerability come from and how do I take steps to help people manage it? And so early in relationships, when uncertainty is high, we can only tolerate a small range of vulnerability and still fit beneath that threshold.
Hmm.
But as that relationship deepens and the uncertainty goes down, the range of vulnerability we can tolerate starts to grow. And so if I am advising leaders, I'm talking to them about what are the steps you take, what are the levers you pull to help reduce people's uncertainty so that they can better predict your behavior. That's when we start to see trust emerge.
So having a more consistent behavior, uh, making sure that we reduce the amount of uncertainty and increase transparency in the workplace as much as possible.
Yeah, so I believe that there are 10 levers that we can pull
Okay.
to build trust. Four of them reside within uncertainty. And we all have the ability to build trust, Sam. Some are just better than others. Those who aren't very good have a lever that they pull. It's usually the ability lever, right? I have these credentials, this much experience, this kind of background. This is the role I'm in. Those who are better at building trust have multiple levers. And those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one. And so uncertainty comes from two places. It comes from us as individuals and it comes from the context we're embedded in. Context is like the rules of the game, right? And a lot of times when I ask people, if you could be anywhere doing anything with anyone right now, how many of you would choose to be sitting here with me, listening to me yammer on about trust? Now I've stopped doing that because it's not good for my self-esteem. But context is one of the levers that we can pull. And so if we can
Yeah.
describe how we're constrained, both the formal and informal rules that govern our behavior, it makes us easier to predict. And we can also put rules in, you know, job performance metrics, evaluation metrics to further constrain our behavior to make it easier for people to predict us. And on the individual side, this is where most of the trust literature is focused. It's the three levers are benevolence, integrity, and ability. And benevolence is a belief you've got my best interest at heart and that you'll act in my best interest, even if it's not in your own short-term best interest. Integrity is, do I follow through on my commitments? And do my actions line up with the values that I express? And ability is, do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And even though that's our favorite lever, we often miss, right? Like I could sit with your audience and say, I have a PhD from Duke and I've spoken at Harvard and I've been nominated as one of the world's thought leaders on this topic. For most of them, that's irrelevant. What they really want to know is, can I explain trust in a way that they can actually do something about? And can I think about their situation and help them problem solve the challenges that they're having with others? That's what ability looks like for them. If I think about it for you as a podcaster, you're thinking about, can I engage the audience? Can I bring them something of value that makes them want to come back?
Right.
That's what ability starts to look like. And so if we don't include other people in that conversation about what good looks like, what excellence is, then we risk missing when we try to pull that lever.
Well, let's talk a little bit about benevolence because I think that our listeners can think about, okay, they have the concept around ability and integrity. But then when it comes to benevolence, I mean, we all feel like we would like the best for others. But I think that a lot of leaders don't do the homework, what it takes to really understand someone. So what do you think that, what are the things that leaders can do to flex that muscle of benevolence?
So I tend to think of it as having someone's back. And a lot of times when I talk to leaders, they say, oh, I do those things. You know, benevolence, integrity, ability, I do those things. And my response will often be, says who? Right? Because if it's me telling you I'm benevolent, Sam, that doesn't carry nearly as much freight as you believing it. And so a lot of times we again need to include the other person in the conversation. You know, imagine you and I are sitting having a nice dinner, and I'm about to tuck into this decadent dessert, and somebody walks by our table and says, oh God, Darryl, you're not really going to eat that, are you? They have my best interest at heart, but it doesn't land that way in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't realize that this body doesn't just happen. It takes years of neglect. Like bad decisions have been made. And so a lot of times when I talk to people about benevolence, I give them a script to use. And you can form this to your own needs, right? To your own language, to whatever works best for you. But I start off by saying, heard this guy talking about benevolence, says it's really important for trust. And it's just really a fancy word for having someone's back. And I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that? And 99 times out of 100, the other person will go, oh God, yeah, I've either experienced it or I've seen it. And then we get curious about that. Well, what did you see? What happened? Where was the mistake made? Right? Where was the misperception? And then we narrow the funnel and we prime them by saying, has someone ever really had your back? What did they do? What did that feel like? How did it make you feel? How did it set you up for future relationships with that person? And we get curious again because they will think now about someone who really looked out for them. Then we narrow the funnel further and we say, what is success for you? How do I help you get there? What would it look like if I was benevolent? And now we've created a moment of opportunity for transparency because being benevolent isn't always about being nice. It's about helping somebody meet their goals and objectives. And so we can then in the future say, you remember when you told me this is what you wanted? This is what success looked like for you. This is me trying to help you get there. And so as a leader, if someone says to you, I'd like to get a promotion, the right response isn't, oh, that's great. I'll try to see if we can make that happen. It's, okay, so here's what the expectations are for the next role. And I'm going to do my best to try to hold you to account as though you were in that role. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to show other people that you're ready for that role. So it's easier for me to make the case for you. And you're going to be asked to do more. I'm going to spotlight you more often. I'm going to do all these things so that it makes it easier for us to help you transition into that role successfully. And so then when you're asking them to do extra tasks or asking them to do things that are more public facing, you can say, you remember when you told me this is what you wanted? This is me trying to help you get there.
Mhm.
And so it allows you to more effectively pull that lever without misunderstandings. It creates transparency.
Now you mentioned something else that was really interesting there, Darryl, in that last comment there. So, for instance, it's not only important to have the trust of between the manager and the employee, but you also mentioned other coworkers, other stakeholders, gaining their trust as well. And so, how
Yeah.
should a leader think about that dynamic overall?
Well, we want our teams to have trust, and a lot of times we're hampered by a profound lack of awareness, right? And I've worked with a number of senior executive teams who say, oh, we don't really need this. We trust each other. And then partway through, we'll do like an 8-week course with them or something like that. They'll say, okay, we've come to realize that we don't actually trust each other. We just like each other. When I ask the fundamental questions of who do you trust or who trusts you, for the who do you trust question, I get close, tight personal relationships, family, friends, best friends, siblings, parents. And the reality is, we trust people all the time. It's how societies function. When I ask the question, who trusts you? I get this long pause, and then people say, well, how would I know? How do I know if somebody trusts me or not? And the answer to that is right back to the definition. It's the willingness to be vulnerable. So, how can people make themselves vulnerable to you? And then do they? And so, if your team trusts you, how can they make themselves vulnerable to you? Well, they can take risks, they can try new things, they can tell you the bad news first. They can push back against ideas they don't think are going to work. They can make suggestions that they're not completely positive about, but are sort of in the nascent phase. These are all signs that they're willing to make themselves vulnerable and that they trust you. And if your team trusts each other, then they're willing to rely on each other. They're willing to ask for help. They're willing to share resources, and they're willing to put the needs of the group ahead of their own. So if we see those environments, those are places where teams really thrive and perform at their best levels. Otherwise, they can be sluggish and slow to respond and slow to adapt.
Mhm. Right. And then it also seems that, trust by its very nature is somewhat conditional, right? So it's like, for instance, you might trust your doctor wholeheartedly, but you might not necessarily trust him to do your taxes. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So one of my favorite examples when I talk about context is, you go to the doctor's office, they say, take off your clothes. And we do, Sam. I've tried that in other places. It doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
The context is very important there. And in fact, if we took that example and we had the same two people dressed the same way, we moved it from a doctor's office to a bathroom at a gas station, it becomes creepy in a heartbeat.
No kidding.
And yeah, and so a lot of times people will ask the question, do you trust me? And the right response is with what?
Yeah.
Right? Because we often don't know who we trust or how much we trust them until we get to that spot where we go, oh, not there. All of a sudden, I feel uncomfortable. My stomach's upset. I'm nervous. And so you're right. Trust is conditional and it ebbs and flows, right? There are moments where we trust people more than less. I'm legally blind. You can trust me with certain things and absolutely not with others, right? And so, yeah, it's a good insight, Sam.
So I realize that there's with the work context when we're thinking about work and we have a high performer. Usually a person can be a high performer in a narrow set of duties, and then there may be some areas where they're untested.
Right.
So, and I think that sometimes I feel like leaders and employees, this is where there might be a bit of a rub because when we trust performance in one situation, but then in another, sometimes that high performer can feel slighted. It's like, oh well, I perform well everywhere else for you, don't I? And so it's like, is there a way that leaders can frame the conversation to really help engage that person, help them understand in the right appropriate context? What's the best way to handle that?
So, one of the challenges we see unfolding is that the world's evolving and moving incredibly fast. And leaders themselves are facing challenges with letting go of the things that got them where they are and stepping into the things that could make them great in their next role. And unfailingly, when I ask leaders, are you the same leader you were 5 or 10 years ago? They say, no, I've learned, I've evolved, I've grown. So are you going to be the same leader 5 years from now? I sure hope not, right? But for us to grow and evolve and develop, we're going to make mistakes because I don't know about you or your listeners, but when I try something new, I'm usually not great at it. And there's a lot of room for me to learn and grow and improve. And so leaders can act as role models by saying, I'm not perfect and I'm going to be evolving and adapting to become a better leader than I am today. And when I do that, I'm going to make mistakes. I will stumble. I may fall. And when I do, my expectation is that you're going to be there beside me, helping me learn, grow, and adapt, because that's exactly what I'm going to be doing for you. And so if we can role model that behavior, then when our superstars are treading into areas that they're not familiar with, we can tell them our expectation is that we haven't seen you do this before. We don't know how well you're going to do. There may be stumbles, and that's okay. We need to create an environment that allows for innovation and adaptation, which means that people are going to make mistakes.
So I think that's where leaders need to understand when we're thinking about competency with a particular employee. A person, they may have the strong skills in one area and your unknown skills in another. But one thing that I think that's important for them to consider is the fact that, okay, what are their behaviors? So if in areas where the skill is uncertain, we can rely on behaviors. So are they going to come
Right.
to me when they have a question? Are they going to come to me when they don't know what to do and they're stumped so I can give them support? So I think that's a key piece that leaders can set expectations with their people.
Yeah, and we have this tendency to want to measure outcomes rather than process.
Mhm.
And there's risk there because, I had a senior executive, a CEO, and his head of sales in one of my courses. And I said to the CEO, how do you measure if the sales department's doing a good job? He said, well, they hit their numbers. I said, how do you know you set the numbers right?
Mhm.
How do you know things haven't changed, right? Like, how do you know that those numbers couldn't have been achieved by anyone? And conversely, how do you know that the market didn't get worse and so that those numbers were impossible, but your guy did the best job that anyone could have done?
Yeah,
And so a lot of times we need to think more about the process than the actual outcome, because if we get the process right, we're going to get better outcomes. And
great.
so, yeah. And so a lot of times we need to be thinking about, as you were talking about,
Mhm.
behaviors or the pattern that we see. We, particularly men, more often senior executives are really reluctant to ask for help or feedback. And, I was talking to a group of senior executives, a C-suite for this mid-sized company, and I asked them to tell me stories about when they'd helped somebody else out, when they'd shown benevolence, and powerful moments, right? People telling stories about people they'd helped, impact they'd had in the world. Everyone's smiling. The energy is just bubbling, right? You can feel it. It's like electricity in the air. I said, this is awesome. Now, if you could just explain why you're so effing selfish. And they kind of go, oh, what are you talking about? I said, you've just told me how powerful it is to help somebody. And you're experiencing it now vicariously, even years later. But you never let anyone have that opportunity with you. You never ask for help. You never admit you don't know something. You never reach out to each other and allow someone else to have that moment with you. And it was a changing point for that leadership team.
I love that. I mean, because I do think that is a common problem with a lot of leaders. They feel like that they have to know it all and that they don't know the answer. It can make them look like a poor leader or uh, are not up to the job. And so I'm glad to hear that you say that for sure.
Yeah. And, similarly, some leaders have come back to me and said, hey, when I admit vulnerability, people think I'm incompetent, right? They have
Mm.
this story. And so we need to be clear about how much vulnerability we share.
So just on that topic, are there different rules between the genders? I mean, as if a woman shows that she's vulnerable in a leadership position, is it thought of differently as a male in your experience?
It seems to be. And part of the difference we see among the genders is that men have this overwhelming confidence often in the absence of any evidence that suggests they should have it.
Hmm.
And I think the research suggests that men are willing to apply for any job if they think that they meet one or two of the criteria. And women are reluctant to apply unless they meet all of the criteria. And so leaders in general tend to see the admitting of mistakes or failures as career limiting or ending, which they don't realize then translates into micromanagement because that means that they can't let other people make mistakes either. And trust is a two-way street, right? I mean, I can trust you a certain amount, but if I don't get the sense that you trust me back, then it's a limitation on that relationship. And if I'm going to make myself vulnerable to you, there's a reciprocal nature to that, right? And a lot of times when I talk to people about building trust, I say, start with a small dose of vulnerability because it signals to the other person that it's okay. And if they respond in kind, then you're good to go, right? You can start that sort of reciprocal levels of vulnerability increasing slowly over time. If they don't, then that's a signal that you may not want to go any further with that person. And so as a leader, it's kind of share, don't scare. I mean, we don't say, hey, I've got no frickin' idea what we're doing. I have no idea what the plan is or how to implement or no, we start off with, I don't have all the answers. And when I was in your role, I made a lot of mistakes early. These are the things I learned. And I'm on the learning curve still just like you are. Or, hey, you're the technical expert on this. The moment I sat behind this executive desk, my technical skills started to atrophy. And you're in the trenches every day. And so you're more up to date on this than I am. So acknowledging that other people have expertise,
Hmm.
that you might need help, that you might make mistakes, those are all ways that we can make ourselves more human and give people permission to learn and to
Yeah.
try new things.
Finding a way to break down that wall, to give them a moment of grace so that they can let down their guard.
Right.
That kind of
And
brings us down and back to what we originally talked about. You were talking about building trust in that hostile environment where trust
right.
has not existed for quite some time. And so, can we revisit that? What is the secret there to turning the page to building trust after people have been damaged so much?
So there's a number of things that I did in my doctoral thesis that hadn't really been done before. One of them was the inclusion of context. One of them was talking about vulnerability, which allows us to talk about levels of trust. Because otherwise, the trust literature treats trust like a dichotomous variable, like it's either present or absent, right? Like an old time light switch. But sort of the core contribution was the inclusion of emotions. And so we look at the uncertainty and vulnerability, we make the trust decision, we have perceived outcomes. And I use that word very intentionally, perceived, because you and I can have the same experience and have different perceptions of what just happened. And that feeds back into our next interaction together. But in the middle of all this is our emotional states, whether we like or dislike one another. And most of the trust literature treats people like they're rational actors. I don't know if your audience has met people before, but we're not always rational.
That's right.
And the more powerful those emotions become, the less rational we are. And so when we're in a hostile environment, people really dislike each other. So most of the trust literature has been proposing a cognitive, rational solution to a profoundly emotional problem. We need to reset those emotional states first. And those are two of the levers in the model, right? I said there were 10 levers. Four of them are in uncertainty, two are in vulnerability, two are in perceived outcomes, and two of them are in emotions.
So, just one moment there, Darryl. I mean, there's got to be a reason why a person wants to even go through the process of building trust. I mean, it's like, what's going to get me in the same room with a person that has done me wrong for years? And I mean, is there some work there that needs to start to where you're bringing two people together that have had some serious disagreements? I mean, what needs to happen to even get the people in the same room?
A lot of times it's a shared superordinate goal, right? We both want something to happen. I was working with a company in Luxembourg when I was teaching there, and I was training some of the up and coming executives, folks who were about to transition into senior executive roles. And things were going well. So the head of people said, "Hey, I'd like you to talk to our board of directors, spend the day with them." I said, "Sure, I'll be happy to do that." And then the day before I was set to meet with them, they said, "Oh, by the way, the unions are going to be there." And I said, "Well, that'll be different." And they said, "Just so you know, we've been in court with each other for the last 5 years and everybody hates everybody." And so this is one of the downsides of writing a doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments. You tend to end up in hostile environments. And so I find myself standing in front of these folks trying to find common ground, right? Because they're about to have to negotiate their next collective bargaining agreement.
Right.
And so I explained to them all why I was an independent party, why I wasn't there on anyone's side, but I was there to represent all three sides because there were two unions negotiating. And I just started to walk them through the model. And we managed to talk through some of the things that had happened, some of the emotional things that had gone on, and provide a framework for them to actually have a conversation. And so once we were able to kind of reset those emotional states a little bit, I mean, part of what I did, Sam, was I got them to like me and to feel like I was there to help. And we were able to talk through violations that had occurred around benevolence, integrity, ability, the context, how the rules had shifted and changed over time in a way that some didn't think was fair, that they weren't being equally applied across all settings. And at the end of the day, they actually all came up, shook my hand, said it's the first time we've had hope in 5 years.
Wow.
And so you're right, they need to have a shared objective and to be able to focus on that. And a lot of times we need to actually figure out a way to try to reset those emotions, find an overlap of interest, find an overlap of opinion, an agreement that, yeah, we all agree on certain things as a basis for us to move forward.
So that's the start, and then of course I imagine you mentioned there's 10 levers to pull. I mean, it's quite a detailed. I don't think we have time to go through each of the levers, and I appreciate the ones that we've gone through so far. But as we conclude here, Darryl, I'm the one thing that is coming into the equation now as far as trust is that when we have new technologies. I mean, we're such as artificial intelligence, and this is
Right.
something that is just quite different, right? Because it's usually when you're working with machines and you pick up your calculator or whatever or your computer and you put in numbers, you can pretty much trust the output. But now we're in a
Right.
situation where we have something that's new and it's inherently flawed. It's getting better and so forth, but there's this element that we need to work with. And so, how should leaders, and their employees work together with artificial intelligence when it's in this new environment where sometimes it's embedded in the system, sometimes we're using it on a chatbot, um, and so forth. What have leaders been dealing with in this area?
It's a real challenge. And we're seeing this play out around artificial intelligence and around remote work, which is changing the dynamic of relationships. Um, and it's provoking a lot of uncertainty. And right now, the trust levels are at the lowest we've ever measured. We've got a whole new generation coming in where people are saying they don't want to work hard and they don't care about the same things we cared about, and I can tell you that we can find quotes that echo that from the 1930s. So this isn't a new phenomena. What we as more senior folks are failing to realize is that the rules of the game have changed and that the next generation actually understands the game better than we do.
Hmm.
And so when we say to them, hey, you need to work hard and do everything your boss tells you, what they hear is you need to work harder so that they make more money. And really, when we talk about why trust is at such a low level, I'm going to go back to that uncertainty times vulnerability formula. Our vulnerability hasn't gone down, Sam, and it might have crept up a little bit,
Hmm.
but our uncertainty is bouncing all over the place. And when our uncertainty is as high as it is, it makes it harder for us to ask people to be just a little more vulnerable. And so when we're talking about artificial intelligence, we need to be able to explain what rules it follows and be aware that it may not always have our best interest at heart. It has the best interest of whoever programmed it.
Yeah.
And so as a leader, I need to be able to shield my people, create a safe harbor for them where they feel respected and valued. A lot of times software companies will come in and say, we're going to make everything easier for you. And what the employees hear is, you're going to need half of us. And so we need to be sensitive to the fact that the rules are changing. We need to have conversations that create clarity about what those rules are and create clarity around what the implications are going to be.
Thanks, Darryl. Now, as we wrap up our conversation today and we think about the most important thing that leaders should be having top of mind right now, given all that's going on in the world, what would you recommend that they focus upon?
For me, there's a lot of factors that drive success or failure for leaders. Building relationships is one of the few that's actually within your control, and you can be intentional about it. And so, the thing that differentiates leaders who are merely okay from those who are truly exceptional is the ability to build strong relationships. And so, I think it's something that we should be intentional about. People should be investing in it because it's going to matter. And you honed in on benevolence right from the start. It's, I think, one of the more critical levers right now. People need to feel like you've got their back because it's hard for us to predict the future with any level of accuracy. What people need to know is that you're going to try to look out for them no matter what, because ability is a moving target. Integrity gets harder and harder because I can't commit to things long term anymore because the world's moving so fast.
Right.
Context is moving and evolving, but I can have your best interest at heart always.
Thanks, Darryl. So as we conclude our discussion today, I mean, what are you looking forward to for the rest of the year here?
So I've started a new project. The data around young men is pretty horrifying. Mental health challenges, suicide rates are 80% of suicides are young men. Um, they're underperforming in terms of job market, in terms of school. All the indicators are negative. And so we're starting something called the Aspiring Men's Program, AMP, which is aimed at helping them be more intentional about building strong relationships that'll help them be more resilient in the world.
I'm glad to hear that you're working on that. I know that is a big concern um, across the people I speak to, and also as a father, I have two sons, and
Yeah,
the world is quite a different place. I mean, one of them went through COVID, where they're severely impacted, isolated, and they missed their entire high school years. And so missed that
yeah,
socialization. Of course, boys nowadays are spending a lot of time behind the gaming machine and things impacting them there. And
yeah.
then plus the past 8 years or more, I mean, they feel like they've been beaten up on just as from society. So there's a lot of things I think that they've experienced that were quite unique in their time. So I'm
Yeah,
excited to see about that work.
the inspiration for me is I've got two sons who are 24 and 21. They're the center of my world.
Hmm.
And I want the world to be a better place for them. And they're doing well, they're thriving. But part of that is because I used the model that I developed with them for their whole lives. And I've taught them how to use the model to build stronger relationships, which allows them to be more resilient in the world. So that's what I want to share with people.
Well, let's get back on the phone when you complete that work and get that established. I'd love to discuss that topic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Darryl, for your time and sharing your wisdom around trust. I mean, this was very enlightening for me. I loved going into this topic deep, and hopefully our leaders out there have gained as much as I have. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. And if people want to see the full model and talk about how to pull the levers, they can just buy the book.
Nice. And they can find that on Amazon. Is that correct? Or
They sure can. Yeah,
okay,
anywhere you buy books online, it's available as an ebook or an audiobook or in hardcover.
perfect. All right. For all those listening in, we'll